Hey, welcome back to the eDrum Workshop. I'm Luke, and today we're going to take a look at the current state of the DWE. There have been quite a few updates to various components since my big review back in 2024. So I'm going to cover the four main elements that I believe that DW and Roland have tried to address in that time. And of course, whether or not I think they've succeeded, but I'll be doing it through a review of this new kind of kit bundle that they've made available. If you're unfamiliar with the DWE though, don't worry, I'll make sure to catch you up on my previous thoughts throughout the video. Long-time viewers might notice that this isn't my DWE kit. I was sent these white marine pearl shells because the finish on my kit isn't available anymore. So for full transparency about where everything's come from, these shells are a loaner kit. They're going to go back to DW and Roland after this video. The hardware that I'm using is from my own DWE kit, which was sent to me for my involvement in testing the DWE. The Cymbals and the WT10 wireless packs were sent to me originally to make a review of those on their own, but it's become this video now instead, and I'll be keeping those. And the V51 module is my own that I bought as part of a full kit. So it's a bit of a mishmash of sources, but none of the stuff that was sent to me will affect the content of this review. I can stay independent thanks to your support through my store over at theedrumworkshop.com, where you can purchase kits and samples for your electronic drums, like those you'll hear throughout this video. Now, in this bundle, you get the DWE drums, a fully wireless electronic drum kit made from DW Collector's shells with DW design lugs. There's a set of acoustic heads and snare wires included in the package too. You're able to convert these to a premium acoustic kit by removing the internal triggers, swapping the heads, and adding the snare wires and some acoustic cymbals. It comes with a DW5000 hardware pack that has all of the stands that you'll need, including different attachments for both the rubber cymbals and acoustic cymbals, a kick pedal, and you also now get a Roland PD-S20 stand for the module. The cymbal pack, also sold separately as the 4CY4WT01 bundle, comes with 3 CY16RT cymbals, a VH10 hi-hat pad and controller, 4 WT10 wireless trigger adapters for the cymbals, and all of the necessary clips, cables, cable ties, and rotation stoppers. This bundle comes with the Roland V51 module. It's sort of Roland's intermediate module. The Roland DrumLink wireless hub is also included. That's what connects the wireless drums to the module, along with the cables and accessories for it. There's also a nice box of spares and other little treats, and you get a Roland Rubix 24 audio interface too, which technically isn't required for this setup, but if you want to use the kit with a computer to trigger software, you could use that instead of the module. The module does have audio interface capabilities, but that box is a little bit more compact and also has combo XLR jack inputs if you need them. There's a lifetime key for DW's Soundworks VST included, and as with all current Roland kits, you also get 6 months of Roland Cloud subscription with the kit, so you can download sound expansions for the V51 module to get more sounds, including many DW kits. There are a few other bundle configurations available. 4-piece shell packs, different finishes, versions with the V71 module, or even the original metal DWE cymbals. The common thing with all of these bundles is that you get almost everything you need to start playing included outside of drumsticks, headphones, and a throne. Quite a few electronic kits don't include snare stands, hi-hat stands, or kick pedals, so it's great that you don't need to purchase any of these separately, and it's all really sturdy hardware. Much higher quality than you'd usually find supplied with a standard E-kit. This is a high-end kit after all. If you want to play double kick, then you'll need a different pedal, but otherwise you're good to go. So this is issue number one that I think these bundles are trying to address: a complete hardware ecosystem. The way that the DWE originally launched had a different concept. Its focus was on integrating with a computer and relying on software for the sounds. A lot of players already ditched their module sound, so why not offer that as a standard? So you got the kit, an audio interface, and the DW Soundworks software. Then it was possible to use it with other software or even a module with its MIDI out capabilities. The downside was that the hardware to power your sounds wasn't included. You'd need to invest in a computer or a module on top of this expensive kit if you didn't already own them. So the flexibility was great, but leaving this gap in the ecosystem could mean more expense, more potential room for error, and a steeper learning curve for those less tech-savvy players. This bundle just makes things simpler. They're sold as a self-contained solution with a module for its sounds like e-kits usually are. So if you want to, you can do everything in the box. Well, almost everything. When I started playing this kit, it didn't play quite as well as I expected coming from my own DWE kit. At the beginning it was a little bit frustrating, but then I thought to myself, wait, are these pads up to date? Yes, the pads have firmware in them that can be updated. Roland's digital pads can be updated through the module nowadays, so I just sort of assumed that the DWE pads could be too. They can't. You still need to hook them up to a computer and use DW's control software to update the pads and the hub. There are advisements about this in the manual and in DW's online quick start guides, so I did the update and things did improve. There is another function too that I'll bring up later that can't be done either, but that one is a bit more niche. So fingers crossed that this will be added in a future update. I think that having access to every function directly from the module would be ideal for a package like this. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the V51 module. I could very easily do a full video on the module and its overall strengths, weaknesses and features. But since it's adding a new facet to the ecosystem, I'll break down its contribution and some comparisons with the V71. So this is the mid-tier in Roland's current V-series lineup. It's above the V31 but below the flagship V71, but this generation of modules is a bit different to the previous ones. All three tiers now share the same sounds, editing features and general settings. They also support the same Roland Cloud expansion packs, they can hold the same number of user samples, and they even share the same screen. There are only three real differences overall. 1. The materials that the modules are made from. The V71 is the most robust, while the 51 and 31 are more plasticky overall and have softer buttons. 2. The controls on the front. They all have different amounts of buttons and faders and different layouts. This also goes on to affect some of the menu structures and the workflow within the module's user interface. And 3. The total number of inputs and outputs that are available. The V71 has 2 master outputs and 8 direct outputs, whereas the V51 has 2 master outputs and 2 direct outputs, though these can be used as 4 direct outputs in whatever configuration you choose. There are 2 headphone outputs, a 1/4-inch jack and an 1/8-inch jack, and that's a nice upgrade from the previous generation and also matches the V71. The V51 also has 12 overall pad inputs compared to the V71's 14 inputs. There's no dedicated AUX 4 input and no dedicated Tom 4 input. Instead, you can swap the first AUX input between either AUX 1 or Tom 4. And you might think that that wouldn't matter when you're using the DWE kit because the wireless hub supports up to 30 pads, but it does. The same limitations apply, and I'll expand on that a bit later on. There are the same number of USB inputs as the V71 too, rather than the single USB input provided on the V31. There are some limitations of that too that I'll also come back to later on. At first glance, I thought it was quite interesting that this bundle was available with a mid-level module. DWE kits are marketed as such a premium product that it almost feels like they should just come with a V71 by default. However, it does make more sense if you think of separating it by professional users and home users. There might be some pro players out there buying a kit like this who would need the V71's flexibility, but a lot of the target market are probably going to be home users who just wouldn't use those options. There are no compromises to the sound or general functionality, and you can still record using the same number of outputs over USB as the V71 if you need to. So if you're not amplifying your kit in a venue where there's a sound engineer who wants full control, there's really no reason to pay extra for those additional outputs or a more ruggedly constructed box. I should probably be kinder to the V51 really and call it a semi-pro module, and in that respect it totally fits the brief for this bundle, and by extension I think they've achieved that goal of completing the hardware ecosystem. If you want a high-end kit that comes as an all-in-one solution but you don't need all of the pro features, then this works. The next element that they've tried to address is the overall volume and the feel of the kit. They've done this in a couple of ways, and the least obvious looking at the kit setup now was the one that I noticed when I was unboxing the shells. The kick drum now comes with a pre-installed double kick patch on the batter head. And I am in two minds about this one because I genuinely think that the DWE kick has one of the best feeling mesh heads available. It's really satisfying to play and it's also surprisingly quiet, especially compared to basically all of Roland's current offerings. This patch though is a little bit plasticky, which both changes the feel and adds to the noise a bit, especially if you're using a hard beater. However, it does allow you to use a felt beater without worrying about any damage to the mesh or the beater, so that does help to soften things back up a bit. The more obvious and impactful change though is the cymbals. The metal on plastic design of the original DWE cymbals was one of my main complaints. Not only did I think they felt a bit stiff to hit, they were also very loud. Rubber cymbal pads make a big difference to the volume, and the noise that they do make is less annoying. I personally find these rubber cymbals much more fun to play, honestly. I know that some people dislike rubber cymbals, and we all dream of a realistic electronic cymbal, but the previous DWE cymbals were not that. Playing on the bow was okay, but playing into the edge felt very clunky. Before I received these Roland cymbals, I'd only really used the older, thicker cymbals, which were decent, if a little bit heavy. These thin cymbals have even more flexibility, which means that a glancing blow to the edge has some give, which I really like. They can also still sway freely if you keep the wing nuts a little bit loose, which I find much more appealing than the heavy donk of the DWE cymbals. The rebound across the bow is also preferable in my opinion. There are some rubber cymbals out there that maybe flex a bit more than these or even choke a little bit easier, such as those from ATV, F-Note or Unlock, but these work well and I think that the bundles are a much more desirable package because of this option. They also have the added benefit of being much softer on your sticks, so your sticks can last much longer, which is very nice. The rest of the kit overall is still a little bit louder than most E-kits because the kick and the toms have acoustic resonant heads on them, though the pre-installed pillow helps with the kick. And the rims still don't use any kind of rim guard either. Personally, I would like the option of having rubber rims for volume and also to help save your sticks even further because rim shots can still chew them up. But aesthetically, I do think that the bare rims are very pleasing and my sticks definitely fare better than they used to thanks to the cymbals. I've been kind of waiting in the hope that Roland's new mesh heads and rims with the rubber trim on the inside are added to the DWE at some point. Last time I tried adding rim guards to the DWE though, the rim triggering completely fell apart, so I don't know how likely it is to see these in the future, at least without any updates to the triggering. So in many respects, the rubber cymbals are an upgrade from the metal cymbals, and I would say that they do achieve the goal of bringing down the overall volume of the kit and improving its feel. But if we look beyond those strengths, some aspects do feel like a bit of a downgrade. The most obvious are the aesthetics and size of these cymbals, along with the one-piece hi-hat. The original DWE cymbals might not have felt amazing, but they did look quite nice, from the top at least. They were also 16 inches for the crashes, 18 inches for the ride and 14 inches for the hi-hat, which also had a bottom plate that gave it more of an acoustic look, even if it didn't really technically add much functionality. The Roland cymbals, on the other hand, are 16 inches for all of the crashes and ride, and 12 inches for the hi-hat. The annoying thing about this is the fact that the ride and the hi-hat really are the two cymbals that benefit the most from having larger surface sizes on the bow zones, yet those are the ones that you lose a couple of inches from. For a premium offering, it's a real shame. A lot of cheaper kits now include 18-inch ride and 14-inch hi-hats, and many of them also have two-piece hi-hat designs. It really undercuts the premium vibe that the DWE is trying to give off. I kind of understand why Roland don't offer any analog cymbals in the same sizes of the digital ride. Maybe they think it would make the digital ride less unique, or it would kind of compete with its own product, but it has a knock-on effect of limiting this setup. The VH13 hi-hat has also been discontinued, so they wouldn't include that here either. That was actually the same size as this, 12 inches, but at least the two-piece design made it look a bit more competitive. These cymbals also only play across about half of their surface, whereas the DWE cymbals could be triggered 360 degrees. That's a technical downgrade again, though personally I don't mind it too much. The DWE cymbals could freely rotate, so it made sense to have them play 360 degrees. These cymbals use rotation stoppers to keep the playable area facing you, so I don't really need the back end of the bow or edge zones to trigger on these. Let's have a look at the WT10 wireless trigger adapters next, because they kind of cross over into all of the elements that this bundle addresses, but they're very important for the next two elements. The adapters originally launched in 2025 alongside the cymbal bundles that I mentioned earlier, and their main goal is to allow for expansion and compatibility within the DWE ecosystem. One of the main downsides that I mentioned back in my review was the fact that only DW's own pads had this wireless tech built in, so expansion was a little bit awkward. If you wanted to keep everything wireless, you were limited to DWE shells and cymbals with their sizes. If you wanted to use any other kind of pad, they'd have to be wired, and to do that, if you didn't already have a module or trigger device, you'd need another one just to handle those components. The WT10 packs bridge that gap, so you can bring other kinds of pads into the wireless ecosystem, though at the expense of having some cabling. You plug the trigger cables from the pad into these boxes rather than a module, and the box connects wirelessly to the hub. Unfortunately, they only take jack inputs for analog pads too. It seems that the digital pads can't work with this wireless tech at the moment. Now, on one hand, these are kind of less discreet in a way, because you've still got a cable, and now you've also got a fat box attached to your stands. On the other hand, the cables can generally be kept much shorter, and they don't run down to the ground or off to the side. So you still get the advantage of being able to pick up a stand and move it around without getting tangled up. I do think the perfect version of these would have been smaller. Ideally, something you could just plug into a jack discreetly, like those wireless guitar systems that you can get. However, the packs need two AA batteries like the drum and cymbal pads, and there is a bit more going on inside than just a wireless antenna. So maybe it's not possible to condense it all enough, or they'd be too weighty and they'd affect the balance of the cymbals. They do feel like a little bit of a stopgap until this wireless gets added to a bunch of different pads down the line, but there's no guarantee that that will happen. One of the strengths of their size and form factor, though, is actually their functional flexibility. Each pack has two inputs which allow you to use either a 3-zone cymbal, a hi-hat pad and its controller, or two dual-zone pads. With this particular bundle, two packs are fully taken up by the ride and the hi-hat, but the module only supports 2-zone crashes, one input each, so you actually have two inputs spare for additional dual-zone pads. Of course, the module itself does have more inputs on the back too for wired pads, but it's nice to have a wireless expansion option built in. You can freely choose which inputs are triggered by each pad on the module as well. Many kits on the module share the same instrument assignments, like there's usually a splash cymbal on AUX1, so you can just pick that input from the trigger menu. If you change your mind, you just go back in and you swap it. Really simple. Of course, by expansion, I'm talking about the ability to add more wireless pads, not the ability to expand beyond the input count of the module. Which is a shame because there's a built-in expansion option on the module that's not being utilised by this setup. I mentioned earlier that the V51 has 12 inputs. Technically speaking though, there are 2 more playable instruments that are locked behind MIDI. These are known as virtual pad inputs, and they allow the module to trigger the same number of instruments as the V71 if you send their MIDI notes into the module. I've used this feature and it works really well. I also mentioned that the DrumLink hub can support up to 30 pads. So some of you might wonder, can I trigger those virtual pad instruments with pads that are connected to the DrumLink hub? Well, if you're using the DrumLink hub plugged directly into the module as intended, no, you can't use those virtual pad inputs with these wireless pads. From the pad assignment screen, you can only set DrumLink pads to trigger one of the physical inputs, not the virtual inputs. It's just a hard-coded limitation. If you want to be able to select up to 14 inputs from that screen, you'd need the V71 module. I do understand this in a way. It puts the DWE kits on the same level as any other Roland kit supplied with their respective modules. You're not getting an advantage and nobody else is being hard done by. But part of me just thinks, well, why not? You're paying such a premium for a bundle like this compared to a standard Roland kit setup, and these virtual inputs already exist. Just let the DWE users have that perk. Now there is a way around this if you use the DrumLink hub in standalone mode, but I'm going to cover this mode a little bit in the next section too, so let's move on. On the compatibility front, I noticed something quite early on when configuring the WT10s. Not all of Roland's pads have presets available. Everything that you get in this bundle is fully supported with a preset as is, but if you want to start bringing in other pads, not all of them are fully supported, and that affects their features too. Almost all types of Roland kick drum pads and triggers have presets available. The BT1 bar triggers are supported in both switched and sensitive mode. There are presets for Roland's RT drum triggers, the rim-mounted ones, and almost all of Roland's crash and ride cymbal pads are supported too. In fact, you actually get an extra feature with those. Positional sensing wasn't available with the DWE cymbals, but I'll get into that shortly. And some other Roland compatible cymbals might function okay too. Unfortunately though, when it comes to hi-hats or drum pads, there are limitations that feel a bit arbitrary and confusing. For the hi-hat, there are only VH10 and VH11 presets available. There's no official support for the VH13. I was able to sort of fudge compatibility with my Lemon 14-inch hi-hat, which uses a similar design, by adding the included rubber washer and adjusting some settings. The VH13 though doesn't come with that washer, and this also made the Lemon hi-hats act like a VH10. I couldn't get the additional foot pressure functionality to work properly for extra tight closed articulations. This lack of a proper preset for the VH13 also means that proper calibration isn't possible, as it works differently to the VH10. As I mentioned earlier, the VH13 has been discontinued, so that could be why, but it's supported by Roland's current modules via the jack inputs, so this feels a little bit unlikely. The drum pad support though is the most disappointing. There are presets for the old school rubber PD-8 pads. They have a rim switch on the side like a cymbal though, so that's not too surprising. Then for mesh pads, only the PDX-6, PDX-8 and PDX-12 have presets. All of those pads are simple dual zone side triggers. There's no official support for any center cone pads, multi-cone side trigger pads like the VAD pads, or the new multi-cone center trigger pads like those that come with the new Roland kits. Now, you can get these pads working with the nearest side trigger preset, but these presets aren't optimized for this trigger setup, and you also lose a feature. If you wire directly to a module, many of these pads can give you different depths of rim triggering via positional sensing. The biggest playability issue though comes with the lack of proper support for either of the center cone styles of trigger setup. That trigger setup is essential for positional sensing on the head zone with Roland modules. So without this support, you can't get positional sensing on either the head or the rim of any drum pads that you hook up with a WT10 adapter. How much of a limitation this will be is of course dependent on the player. The core DWE pads can do some of this. For example, the snare has positional sensing on the head zone. The snare and toms can also do rim clicks and rim shots, though they don't do different depths of rim shots. But if you wanted to add either kind of center trigger as, say, a side snare using the WT10 adapters, you won't be able to get positional sensing at all. If you wired the same pad up to a module, then you could use a position-enabled side snare with no issues. So it's just a downgrade in functionality for what feels like no real reason. I would actually consider buying more WT10 adapters if they had more comprehensive support, but currently I'd rather just wire the additional pads up and get the extra functionality. There is a DWE side snare available now, I'm aware of that, so there is another option outside of the main snare for positional sensing. But if you've already got other pads, or you'd prefer a different form factor, or just, a cheaper pad, this does limit the wireless possibilities. I would also love to have seen a dual mono preset option like you get on the SPD-SX, so that you could split these inputs up even more into 4 single zone pads. I'm not that surprised though overall because the V-drum modules don't support that functionality with their trigger inputs either. So overall, I think it's great that wireless expansion and additional compatibility has been added. I have used one of these inputs for a converted tom that I added to my own DWE kit. It does make the ecosystem feel larger and it gives you plenty of new options, but I would like to see this go further and have proper parity across the wireless and wired options. That would just make the most sense for a package like this. The only problem is that I don't know if this parity is possible, because triggering via the wireless system and triggering via the module's inputs are different. Take a look at these menus. These are the trigger settings for a PDX-8 connected via a WT10 and the drum link, and these are the same for a pad connected directly via a cable. They're quite different. I believe that the DWE pads handle all of the triggering internally with microcontrollers that are inside the trigger system. I think that the module or control app is basically just configuring the triggers, and then you hit the pad and it receives the changes and saves them internally. It appears that the WT10s work the same way, so they aren't using the same Roland trigger engine that gets used if you plug a pad directly into the module. They're using the DWE triggering engine, and they just don't trigger the same. So this leads us on to the fourth element that I'm looking at, and it's a big one that affects this entire package. I've always felt that there was room for improvement with the DWE's triggering. There have been updates since my last review, some of which affect the core DWE pads. And just to be clear, we are getting into some pretty fine details here that maybe won't apply to everybody. It really depends on your expectations and your needs for triggering, but I think it's really important to get granular like this when you're looking at a kit that's priced so highly and it's sold as a premium product above even Roland's own kits. So I'll start with the cymbals. Compared to the original DWE cymbals, the zone support is a little bit different here. All of the DWE cymbals were 3-zone, so the crashes and hi-hat also had bell zones like the ride. With these Roland cymbals, you can technically get 3 zones across the crashes as well as the ride. So if you decide to use a computer for the sounds with Soundworks or other software, you could hook up these crashes with 3 zones using the extra input on the WT10 packs, and that brings them in line with the previous cymbals. The only thing that you'd be missing is the bell zone on the hi-hat. However, the V51 module, and all recent Roland modules, only supports 3 zones on the ride. So even with the old DWE cymbals, you'd never get a bell on your crashes or hi-hat when you're using this module. Whether you care about these pads having a bell zone is entirely up to you. I do like the option, but I don't really genuinely use them in any actual playing situation. And as I mentioned earlier, these cymbals also offer an upgrade to the DWE cymbals. The CY16 RT pads can do positional sensing across the bow, even when using the WT10 adapters. As far as I can tell, this position tracking is about as good as hooking it up directly to the module. It's not as advanced as something like Roland's digital ride, however that is to be expected because it's still an analog pad, and I don't feel like that feature adds that much overall to the playing experience. I also find that the VH10 hi-hat controller is a bit more accurate with its open and closed positions than the DWE hi-hat was. The DWE hat did improve over time with some updates, but I still found the pedal position to be quite jittery overall, and this would sometimes affect the open positioning. It seems that the VH10 doesn't suffer with that problem as much, and that's especially when it's paired with a Roland module which just seems to deal with the fluctuations better as well. Unfortunately though, there's a VH10 triggering issue that I've been struggling to look past. When playing hard or medium hits, the pad double triggers, but it only really seems to manifest while using the WT10 adapters, not when it's connected directly to the module. Depending on the sounds or the trigger curves, this can range from kind of unnoticeable to really obvious. It's something that I've flagged to the DWE team. I spent quite a lot of time testing it back when I first got the cymbals and the adapters, and we narrowed it down. It's been agreed that it's an actual issue, it's not a broken pad or incorrect settings. So I'm hoping that a fix is eventually released for this because it's a noticeable, provable problem that really affects the overall playability of this package. Avoiding the problem by wiring directly to the module isn't so simple either. The V71 has hi-hat input jacks, but for the V51 it's part of the cable loom that connects to the DB25 connector on the bottom. So this is actually worse than a standard cable because you'd be connecting a whole cable loom just for one pad and one controller, with the rest just dangling off the module. Moving on to the rest of the kit, I haven't noticed any obvious differences really to the triggering on the kick or the toms. There might be some small improvements overall since I last reviewed them, but they remain largely the same. The snare has had a big update to the cross-stick detection. I really struggled to get consistent cross-sticks from the DWE snare back when I reviewed it. It really seemed to depend on having your hand right in the centre of the drum rather than off to the side in any way, and even then it wasn't always very reliable unless I put an unnatural amount of pressure on the head. Now it triggers much more easily. I wouldn't go as far as to say it's perfect. I'll still get the odd mistrigger now and again that I haven't been able to dial out, but this makes the overall experience of playing the snare way better though, so I'm really glad that it's improved. A crosstalk cancel parameter was also added to the trigger settings. I'm really not sure why this wasn't a feature back when I first used the kit, but it's a much welcome addition. So the triggering has somewhat improved across the DWE ecosystem, but especially considering the limitations of the presets on the WT10, it's apparent that it's just not as good as Roland's own triggering. But it becomes even more obvious when you compare with Roland's digital pads, which are available with this module in much cheaper kit bundles. For example, if you put the DWE snare up against either of the two available digital snares, it falls behind in quite a few areas. On the newer digital snare, the PD-14DSX, the snare strainer and throw-off functions are also more advanced than the DWE snare throw-off. The DWE drum pads have one triggering capability that the digital snare doesn't: pitch bend and hand mute support. But I have to break the news to you, unfortunately I had to do that example on Soundworks. When paired with a module, these techniques aren't available. So with this package, that feature just isn't a selling point unless you choose to use software instead of the bundled module. And I don't really understand why this is, because it's a cool feature that would definitely add something to this package over Roland's own pads. And maybe that's the reason. Maybe Roland don't want the DWE pads using a feature that's unavailable with their own pads. Or maybe there's a technical reason. Maybe the messages don't line up or something, I don't know, but it feels like something that could be implemented, and it's a missed opportunity to limit the DWE's selling points when it's already kind of struggling to keep up with, say, a VAD516 shell pack. The perfect version of this kit for me would be using all 3 digital pads, but you're limited by the fact that the DrumLink hub takes up one of the USB trigger inputs. Unfortunately, it can't be used with the USB-C port on the side of the module, only a trigger input, and a USB hub won't work either. It is possible to use the DrumLink in a standalone mode and then hook it up to the module with a MIDI cable instead. This frees up that third USB port and also gives you the ability to trigger the virtual pads I mentioned using the MIDI input. However, you then lose the ability to configure the triggers directly from the module, which takes away from the whole seamless integration aspect of this bundle. Personally, I've used a setup like this a lot. This clip is taken from one of my kit demos. I moved the DWE snare to the first floor tom position, and then mapped that as tom 3, and moved the DWE floor tom to tom 4. You also can't save the MIDI mappings directly to the hub without using the control app. That's the other main function that you can't do on the module. The V51 controls the MIDI notes on the way out of the module, but when the hub's in standalone mode, it uses a pre-saved MIDI map instead. I'm quite used to awkward workflows, so I don't mind using the software to achieve my preferred setup, but it's definitely not for everybody, and I'm pretty certain it's not the target market for this kind of bundle. If you keep the hub plugged in as intended, you can add up to 2 digital pads with this setup. If pad sizes are the most important to you, then adding the digital hi-hat and ride would probably make the most sense. The DWE snare is already 14 inches after all. If snare playability is more valuable to you, then of course adding either of the digital snares would technically be a triggering upgrade, though the PD-14DSX also gives you the strainer functionality. But you'd be looking at adding a big expense to an already very expensive bundle. There have also been a couple of DWE updates outside of the triggering, like improvements to the wireless channel options, along with a few extra MIDI maps, a global unpair option to make unpairing all of your drum pads quicker, and a facelift to the colour scheme of Control and Soundworks. All of those are nice quality of life updates. So overall, the big question, is this bundle worth it? I enjoy playing this kit despite its flaws, but I was sent my DWE. I wouldn't be able to afford something like this, and I imagine a lot of people are in the same position. These bundles are basically the most expensive electronic kits you can buy. This V51 bundle with certain finishes can be more expensive than the VAD716, which comes with the V71 module, and its price dwarfs the VAD516, which comes with the same module and all 3 digital pads. Yes, you'd have to buy your own hi-hat stand, snare stand, and kick drum pedal, but they're not going to add anywhere near that kind of cost. The DW hardware is probably much higher quality than the VAD hardware overall, but I don't think that's going to matter to the majority of people either. On the other hand, the DWE kits do beat out Roland kits on choice. There are more finish options, and even some of the cheaper wrap options are nicer than many of the VAD kits. You get a choice of rubber or metal cymbals, and even 2 module tiers or no module at all. The wireless tech also can't be found anywhere else, and honestly, it's still really cool a few years on, even if the WT10 adapters maybe aren't as elegant as built-in wireless. And let's not forget that this kit also converts to a fantastic acoustic kit if you want to. The shells on Roland's VAD kits are just not made to do that. So DWE kits on a whole are for people who have a big chunk of cash that they want to invest in a kit that looks the part, has a premium feel, and has some unique cutting edge tech in it. For those people, I think DW have succeeded in putting together a bundle that addresses the most obvious complaints from the original DWE configurations, and provides a capable module for those who just want to sit down and play. Sure, there are a few trade-offs in aesthetics and cymbal sizes compared to the metal cymbals, but I think that the playability largely makes up for it. The big issue that I have with it at the moment is that the performance just doesn't hit the level that it really should do for this price. A hi-hat double trigger fix really needs to be released. That's priority one in my opinion. Beyond that, it is more in the details. If the triggering on this kit was on par with the VAD offerings, then it would be one of the best kits available, if expensive, so I really hope they can get it there. Thank you so much for watching to the end. What do you think about this kit bundle? Let me know down in the comments. If you're looking for affordable sound upgrades for your electronic kit, go check out my store over at the edrumworkshop.com. But above all, enjoy the rest of your day. Cheers!